What if I told you that beneath our everyday lives lies a hidden world of magical combat, where ancient curses and powerful spells still hold sway? From the binding rituals of Babylon to the fierce curses of Celtic tradition, humanity has always fought against unseen forces. Are you ready to explore the age-old battle between light and darkness? Welcome, Rebels of the Arcane, to the Dark Primordial. I'm your host, Ken Schroer, and today we're delving into the dangerous and captivating world of magical combat and curse breaking. Magical combat and curse breaking have been fascinating and enduring aspects of magical practices throughout history. From the binding spells of ancient Greece to the duel-like magical battles of the 20th century, this rich history offers insight into how people have used magic to combat spiritual oppression, retaliate against enemies, and defend themselves against supernatural threats. So light your incense, grab your favorite snack, and learn about the fascinating evolution of these practices, from ancient cultures to modern-day occult conflicts, including the famed magical battles involving Aleister Crowley.
The origins of curses and binding magic are deeply woven into the fabric of ancient civilizations, reflecting the human desire to manipulate fate, exact justice, and protect oneself from unseen forces. In the ancient Greek and Roman worlds, curse tablets, known as defictiones, were one of the most common tools for binding magic. Crafted from lead and inscribed with detailed invocations, these tablets called upon chthonic deities to hinder adversaries, inflict harm, or gain love. Practitioners would often bury these tablets in liminal spaces like graves, wells, or crossroads to ensure that the underworld spirits could act upon them. This ritual use of sacred space underscores the ancient belief in the permeability of the boundaries between the living and the divine. In Egypt, the power of curses was manifest in various forms. Clay effigies and papyrus scrolls bore inscribed spells invoking powerful deities to intervene in earthly disputes. The Greek magical papyri, a diverse collection of magical texts from late antiquity, illustrates the syncretism present in ancient Egyptian magic, blending Greek, Egyptian, and even Jewish elements to create potent spells. Gods like Hecate and Hermes were invoked, demonstrating how cross-cultural exchanges enriched magical practices and broadened the reach of ancient curse-breaking and curse-casting. Mesopotamian and Babylonian cultures contributed significantly to the art of binding magic, often using clay figures and elaborate incantations to harness divine forces. One notable example is the Magickal ritual series, which sought to counteract witchcraft by burning clay effigies and thereby symbolically destroying the power of hostile spells. The use of fire and clay figures to represent an enemy is a motif that echoes throughout history, emphasizing the symbolic destruction of one's foe to cleanse oneself from spiritual harm. The concept of binding magic extended beyond punishment. It also served to protect and heal. In both Greek and Roman traditions, binding was sometimes used for self-defense or to rectify perceived injustices. If wronged, a person could use a binding spell to ensure that their adversary faced some form of divine or karmic retribution. This duality is reflected in the ethical considerations that practitioners faced, as the line between offensive and defensive magic was often blurred. The persistence of these rituals over the millennia highlights an enduring belief in the power of words, symbols, and intent to alter reality. Ancient cultures viewed magic as an effective means to deal with the challenges and uncertainties of life, especially in a world where divine favor or wrath could dictate the course of one's destiny. Irish cursing traditions occupy a unique cultural space, shaped by centuries of folklore, socio-political struggle, and magical practice. Rooted in both pre-Christian and Christian traditions, Irish curses were an expression of the people's deep-seated connection to the land, community, and spirit world. The use of spoken word was central to these practices, with curses often taking the form of poetic invocations, imbued with the rhythmic cadence of traditional Irish verse. These verbal maledictions held a dual purpose, serving as a means of protection against perceived injustice and as a potent weapon against enemies or rivals. One of the most notable aspects of Irish curses is their connection to the fair folk, or fairies. It was widely believed that invoking the wrath of these supernatural beings could bring swift and severe retribution upon one's adversaries. This belief in the power of fairies added an extra layer of magical potency to curses, as fairies were considered highly unpredictable and capable of influencing the human world in mysterious ways. Furthermore, curses often invoked deities and saints alike, showcasing the syncretic blend of pagan and Christian beliefs that shaped Irish folk traditions. Cursing was often a response to societal tensions or perceived wrongdoings. The agrarian nature of Irish society meant that disputes over land, livestock, and resources could easily escalate, with curses being employed to settle scores or protect one's livelihood. Historical records also show that marginalized groups, such as women and the impoverished, often turned to cursing as a form of empowerment. When other avenues of justice were inaccessible, the spoken curse became a tool to demand retribution, or at least to ensure that an offender did not escape cosmic justice. The art of cursing persisted well into the modern era, evolving to reflect the cultural and historical changes that Ireland underwent. During the colonial period, Irish cursing was both a form of rebellion and a method of preserving cultural identity in the face of external domination. The resilience of these traditions speaks to their role not only as magical practices, but also as a form of resistance, a subtle yet powerful way for the Irish people to push back against oppressive forces. Islamic magic, or seer, has a rich tradition of dealing with curses and magical attacks through a combination of Quranic recitation, supplication, and talismanic practices. Rooted in both religious and folk traditions, these practices offer a comprehensive framework for dealing with negative spiritual forces. In Islamic culture, curses are often seen as resulting from envy, hasad, particularly through the evil eye, ayn. The Quran provides a central means of protection, with ruqya, the recitation of specific Quranic verses like Al-Falaq and An-Nas, commonly employed to dispel harmful energies. Such verses are believed to possess intrinsic power, derived from divine origins, to neutralize curses and shield against malevolent influences. Protective amulets, inscribed with Quranic verses or the names of Allah, are another widespread practice, akin to the talismans used in other traditions for safeguarding against spiritual harm. These amulets act as both a spiritual shield and a deterrent against further attacks. Magical retaliation in the Islamic context is often defensive rather than offensive. Practices, such as those detailed in Shams al-Ma'arif, a controversial grimoire, provide invocations and talismans for countering magical attacks. These practices emphasize invoking divine justice to neutralize threats rather than harm the aggressor directly. The Bible presents curses as both divine instruments of justice and tools for personal retribution. In the Old Testament, curses like those in Deuteronomy 28 were often divine responses to disobedience, illustrating a sacred contract between God and his people. These curses could manifest as ailments, droughts, or exile, serving to correct and guide humanity back to righteousness. The concept of generational curses also appears, where the consequences of sin are believed to affect future generations, emphasizing collective accountability. In the New Testament, there's a shift toward redemption, with Galatians 3:13 declaring that Jesus became a curse to free humanity from sin's spiritual consequences. This demonstrates the transition from judgment to grace, positioning Jesus' sacrifice as the ultimate act of curse breaking. Stories like Elisha cursing disrespectful youths in 2 Kings 2:23-24 illustrate the power of spoken words to enact spiritual realities. Today, many Christian traditions continue to use prayers and deliverance rituals to break perceived curses, focusing on faith and divine intervention as key elements in altering one's spiritual fate. This perspective underlines the power of intention, spiritual alignment, and divine grace in both understanding and overcoming curses. The Renaissance era was marked by a surge of interest in both magic and witchcraft, largely influenced by fears surrounding the unknown and a rapidly changing socio-political landscape. Amidst this environment, King James I of England, also James VI of Scotland, stands out as one of the most vocal and influential figures in the condemnation of witchcraft. His personal fascination with witchcraft was fueled by his own experiences, leading to significant repercussions for how magical practices were perceived and combated during this period. King James's interest in witchcraft became particularly pronounced following his experiences in the North Berwick witch trials of 1590. These trials, which accused dozens of individuals of conspiring to use magic against the king and his bride, deeply impacted James. He became convinced of the real and present danger posed by witches and their alleged ability to wield curses and other forms of malefic magic. This personal connection to witchcraft and curses drove him to write his treatise, Demonology, in 1597, which became a foundational text for justifying witch hunts and magical persecution across England and Scotland. Demonology was not merely a polemic against witchcraft. It also served as a manual for identifying, prosecuting, and combating witches. King James articulated his belief in a cosmic battle between good and evil, in which witches were agents of the devil attempting to undermine the divine order. He detailed various forms of magical combat and protective measures that could be taken against witches, reinforcing the idea that such practices were not only dangerous, but that society had a duty to eradicate them. The text significantly influenced public perceptions of witchcraft, framing it as an organized, diabolical conspiracy rather than a series of isolated incidents. Magical combat during the Renaissance also included protective charms, counterspells, and religious rituals. Clergy and lay people alike would employ prayers, blessings, and holy symbols to protect themselves from curses and evil influences. The use of church-sanctioned magical tools created a paradox. While witchcraft was condemned, certain forms of white magic or divine intervention were not only accepted, but encouraged. King James's narrative portrayed witches as adversaries of both the state and the church, positioning the church's magical protections as divinely sanctioned acts in an ongoing spiritual battle. The fear and persecution of witches that King James helped propagate were instrumental in shaping the witch hunts of the late 16th and early 17th centuries, where accusations, trials, and executions became widespread across Europe. James's ideas provided a theological and legal framework for magical combat against perceived witches, which involved both physical trials and spiritual measures aimed at nullifying curses and binding their practitioners. This systematic crackdown, in turn, revealed the power dynamics of the time. Magic was deemed legitimate only when wielded by the authority of the church or monarchy, whereas folk practitioners were marginalized, demonized, and ultimately prosecuted. Moving into the 20th century now, Aleister Crowley, the self-proclaimed Great Beast 666, remains one of the most controversial and enigmatic figures in modern occultism. Crowley wasn't just a mystic or a prolific writer, he was a master of magical warfare. Throughout the early 20th century, Crowley engaged in several intense battles of will and sorcery, often with other prominent magicians of his time, turning his life into an esoteric battleground that defined his persona and legacy. One of Crowley's most notable magical battles involved his rivalry with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, an influential occult society that initially nurtured his understanding of ceremonial magic. Crowley's desire to ascend within the order brought him into direct conflict with leaders like W.B. Yeats, who opposed Crowley's ambitions and sought to limit his influence. Crowley's infamous attempt to take control of the London Temple, complete with elaborate rituals and even a physical showdown, marked the beginning of his reputation as a formidable practitioner of magical combat. Crowley's most notorious rivalry, however, was with the magician and occultist MacGregor Mathers, co-founder of the Golden Dawn. Their conflict culminated in what many describe as a psychic battle fought on the astral plane, a struggle for power that extended beyond the physical realm. Mathers, who had expelled Crowley from the Golden Dawn, found himself under constant magical pressure from Crowley, who used his considerable knowledge to retaliate with hexes and defensive rituals. These clashes represented not only personal vendettas, but also ideological differences about the direction of modern occultism. His belief in magic as both an offensive and defensive tool was integral to his philosophy of Thelema, a system centered around the principle of individual will and the quest for true spiritual sovereignty. Crowley's concept of the true will empowered practitioners to use magical force when necessary to protect or assert themselves. Perhaps one of the most emblematic instances of Crowley's magical combat was his so-called Battle of Blythe Road. During this confrontation with the Golden Dawn, Crowley donned full ritual regalia, robes, symbols, and a magical weapon to carry out a magical takeover of the Order's temple. This episode illustrated his dramatic flair, but also the seriousness with which he approached magic as an instrument of control and influence. Crowley's influence in the realm of magical combat extends beyond his own time. His teachings have inspired generations of occultists to see magic not only as a path to enlightenment, but also as a means of active resistance against both mundane and supernatural threats. In contemporary times, practices of curse-breaking and defense have evolved, drawing on a diverse array of traditions from around the world. The resurgence of interest in folk magic, particularly through the internet and social media, has led to a democratization of these practices. Individuals now share techniques for countering curses and hexes, often incorporating elements from various cultural backgrounds. One popular method is the use of protective crystals and herbs, with practitioners recommending stones like black tourmaline and herbs like rosemary for their reputed protective qualities. Additionally, spiritual cleansing rituals, such as smudging with sage or using salt baths, are common approaches to dispelling negative energies and breaking curses. These practices reflect a blend of ancient traditions and modern sensibilities, where the psychological and spiritual dimensions of magic are acknowledged. Furthermore, contemporary practitioners often emphasize the ethical implications of curse breaking. Many advocate for a focus on intention and self-defense rather than retaliation, highlighting the importance of maintaining personal integrity and spiritual clarity. This shift is evident in the community's growing emphasis on healing and protective work, rather than engaging in aggressive forms of magic. The practice of curse-breaking today continues to evolve, merging historical knowledge with modern techniques and ethical considerations, making it accessible to a broader audience seeking empowerment and protection in an increasingly complex world.
Magical combat, curses, and the rituals of binding and breaking have formed a complex tapestry across different cultures and eras. From the Greek katadesmoi to Irish maledictions, from King James's fear of witchcraft to Aleister Crowley's magical duels, these practices reveal a deep-seated human need to exert control over unseen forces, to protect oneself and to retaliate against perceived injustices. Whether viewed through the lens of folklore, religion, or occult philosophy, magical combat and the art of breaking curses offer insight into the timeless struggle between power and protection, harm and healing. For the modern practitioner, these practices serve not only as a connection to ancient magic, but also as a means of navigating the spiritual challenges of contemporary life, providing tools for defense, empowerment, and resilience in the face of adversity. If you found this video enlightening, please like, subscribe, and share with others who might be interested in exploring the dangerous and fascinating world of magical combat and curse breaking throughout the ages. Also, consider supporting the Dark Primordial by visiting our Etsy and Shopify stores. There you'll find a curated selection of handcrafted witchcraft and pagan accessories to enhance your own spiritual practice. From hand-poured candles to intricately painted talismans, each item is imbued with intention and power. Until next time, may you become one with your own abyss.